Hey there! Welcome to the Canyons Are Calling podcast. I'm Charles Jocelyn, your host for the show. First of all, I'd like to just say thank you so much for all of the positive feedback that I'm getting from this podcast. It really encourages me to get more content out there. So in May, I've got some exciting stories coming up from kids in canyons. Hopefully you guys are as entertained by the kids as I am. Before I get onto the episode right now, I want to just do a shout out to the logo winners, Julie Sherman and Will Nilsson. Thank you so much for all of the logos that I had submitted. There were so many that it was really hard for me to make a decision, but ultimately the 3 logos that I chose I'm pretty happy with, and I'm gonna start making some stickers and some beer glasses, maybe some hats and t-shirts. So if you're interested in any specific items, let me know. Otherwise, I'll get those out in the next couple of weeks, and I'm also going to be working on a website, so I will get that going. A shout out to Imlay Canyon Gear and Tom Jones for supplying the prizes for the logo winners. There was a Canyon Fire rope and pickpockets. So if you don't know what a pickpocket is, it's this handy little pouch that you put on your chest that I carry my camera, some snacks, and usually the beta for the canyons in there. So the map, things like that. Just a handy little way to carry things when you're in a canyon. I also put my whistle on my zipper of mine, so it's accessible when I need a whistle. Anyway, enough about that. On to this episode of the podcast. It's going to be a little bit different than all the rest of my episodes. This is an interview that Will Nilsson did with me on the Becoming Human podcast. And so he dives a little deep into just how I got to where I'm at now, how I got into canyoneering, and all those kind of things. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode. And then coming in May, we've got the Kids in Canyons series coming up. So looking forward to that. Enjoy your show.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to episode 149 of the Becoming Human podcast. This episode features Charles Rocks Jocelyn. She's the host of the Canyons Are Calling podcast. She's a canyoneer, and she works at Imlay Canyon Gear. Her podcast focuses on canyoneers' adventures, beta, tips, tactics, gear, and even some misadventure. My favorite episode on the podcast is her recent one with Scott Swaney, who's a Death Valley First Ascent legend. The man is prolific, and he's been doing adventure well into his age, and I think it's a beautiful thing. And I aspire to be like Charles and Scott. You can find her podcast on all podcast platforms, and you can find links to that in the show notes or becominghumanpodcast.com. In this episode, Charles teaches us about canyoneering and how it has influenced her life. Canyoneering is a fascinating sport. Charles is based out of it's like southern Utah, and I went there for the first time this year, and it is a unique environment, and it lends itself to like these dry canyons, or mostly dry canyons. The constraints of travel, like going from point A to point B, for instance, you get some very unique experiences and challenges by constraining yourself to these canyons. And these canyons present a variety of obstacles to get through and around. And Charles is just enamored with them. And you can tell that she's really passionate about canyoneering. So it was great to be able to talk to her. You can find links to videos of the canyons discussed on this episode in the show notes or on becominghumanpodcast.com. You can also find the links to the Canyons Are Calling podcast, Imlay Canyon Gear, and her Instagram for the podcast there as well. And I'm going to, at the end of the episode, I'm going to play you out with a song by Aesop Rock and Homeboy Sandman called Ask Anyone.
When the heart is pure, the brain is mush. Thank you for the stories and a fuck you to the normies. Bruin said we lost our Jordan. I would sprinkle in some Voorhees in a great breeze. I have this memory of me and you rapping meat grinder to each other at a BBQ and BK. Got the same memory with a couple other people too. Trading doom lines, that's what people do. You were always kind of me in person. I tried to play it cool, but I was always kind of nervous. 30 summers of guiding the muddy waters to the men with many names. I hope you're somewhere with your brother. Yeah.
Growing up, I grew up in central Utah, and we would camp as a family quite often. We'd go on like big family, extended family camp trips, or just private little camp trips with my brothers and sisters. And so I was outdoors a lot as a kid. And then after high school,
Well, when you guys were kids and you guys are going like camping trips and stuff like that, what was the theme of that? Did you guys do like adventurous things, or was it usually hanging out around the campsite throughout the day?
sometimes we would go fishing, but mostly it was just like set up camp. We would go to super primitive campgrounds, camp spots. I actually didn't camp in a campground until I was an adult and moved to South Dakota.
Whoa.
Yeah, I think I was
That's
22 or
wild.
23. It was crazy. And it was a KOA, and I was like, why do people do this? This sucks.
Is that because of, do you think that some of that has to do with being in Utah at the time, given how like remote and remote it is?
Yeah, and my dad was just he and his friends just like to be outside and camping a lot. So
That's cool.
and like he was into hunting. He never would take me hunting because I was a girl, I guess, but we did go fishing and we got to go camping a lot. And then so when we were camping, the kids would just all go in and explore while parents were, drinking beers and hanging out by the fire or whatever.
That's how it was like for me when I was growing up too.
Yeah. I mean, but definitely exposed me to the outdoors and got a love for nature very early on.
Mhm.
And then right out of high school, I moved around a little bit. I lived in Seattle for a little while, and then Salt Lake, and then South Dakota.
South Dakota, what brought you out to South Dakota?
I fell in love with a guy, and then when I fell out of love, I moved back to Utah.
You didn't like the landscape of South Dakota?
Unfortunately, so I was in Mitchell, South Dakota. And for those of you who don't know Mitchell, South Dakota, it's kind of an hour west of Sioux Falls.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in the flatlands.
Oh, that's
The
what I
only
thought all
thing-
of South Dakota was.
You have the Badlands in like by Rapid City
Mhm.
and like Sturgis and those places, and that's kind of hilly and really pretty.
Oh, okay.
But I was like 350 miles away from that.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it was really flat, and there were like tornadoes in the summertime.
So
and
really scary without all the fun. Like,
my first snowstorm, we got 24 inches of snow overnight.
whoa, that is
Like, it was
wild.
insane. I thought that like growing up in southern Utah, I thought that I knew what snow and winter was about, but no. 24 inches overnight. It was horrible. And then we get ice storms too.
Whoa,
One
what?
time we got 2 inches of ice and then 10 inches of snow and then like 70 to 90-mile-an-hour winds.
Oh my
like,
gosh.
It blew trees down. It was insane.
You can't even go have fun in that. You're like shuttering your doors.
Yeah, you can't go outside in the wintertime. We were
Oh,
without power for 10 days.
whoa.
It was
No
horrible.
way. Wow.
Like luckily at the time we were into real estate investing. We had a rental property that was vacant so we
Mhm.
could stay warm. But
Oh, that's
anywho.
good.
I left South Dakota to come back to southern Utah
Mhm.
because I knew number one, St. George had no snow and Zion was close by.
Did Zion mean something to you at the time?
As a kid, we would go to Zion a lot.
It's
with my
striking
parents.
there, like in terms of like adventurous things, and you could even get some exposure just like, you know, a few minutes right off of the road. Like I've never seen, I'm not really very well traveled yet. So I'm not used to seeing that, like that kind of like grandeur, or very, because when you look at the whole landscape, it really does, you know, make you stop for a moment. And you don't even have to be a nerd about like landscape. Like
Right.
really, and then even when you like, you could park, you know, and you go like, especially on like the east side, and there's like all that slick rock and stuff. It's like you could, you know, find something that's just get your heart rate going a little bit. That's just nice.
Yeah. The east side is my favorite. And like, I mean, I've driven through hundreds of times and I still get blown away. Like it still just makes me happy to drive through. It's awesome. So yeah, I knew like as a kid, we went there, you know, quite a bit as a family. And so I just knew that the Red Rocks were cool and just something drew me to Zion. And so I was able to transfer with my job back to St. George.
No, that's good.
And have a restart there. And that's where I met a friend who got me into climbing a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so climbing for me was kind of cool, but I have arthritis in my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of painful. And you just go up like 30 feet and then do it again and do it again. And it's like the same deal all day and it's painful and whatever. And so he had an opportunity to go through a canyon in Zion called Spry Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And he invited me along and it blew my mind.
Oh.
Like the things that we saw after each turn of the canyon or after each rappel. I want to say there's like 10 rappels in Spry.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenges that we faced, we did some down climbing that I had never done before, like some stemming where your like hands are on one side of the wall and your feet are on the other side of the wall. And you're just like, going across the canyon for a little bit and, you know, things I had never seen or experienced. And it just blew my mind.
What was when you got into climbing and then getting to canyoneering, were these like your first kind of like recreations or hobbies that you're picking up, you know?
I had done some hiking and some backpacking.
Okay.
You know, also in South Dakota, we did motocross.
Oh yeah. That would be fun when it's
that was like the only thing to do when
you go real fast.
Yeah. So but yeah, hiking and then a little backpacking. But then
did it like the hiking and the backpacking light you up like canyoneering did?
No. No. I mean, it does a little bit. I do, you know, I do thrive when I'm outside, but canyoneering, there's something about just going into those arteries in the earth where it takes the ropes to get there. And, you know, you have to overcome your fear in order to get to these places. And every time you walk up to a rappel, you get that, you know, anxious feeling in your stomach and go through that all over again. And it's just experiencing these amazing places is addicting.
Yeah,
for sure.
It really is. And like when you were going through your first time, if you could remember, what was it like for the kinds of rappels? Was that at the time something that you would have been really excited about, or did it create a lot of like anxiety and intimidation?
I was really excited about it. They created a monster when they got me in there. For me, it was way more fun to rappel and go down things than it was to climb.
Oh, really?
So I've only been climbing maybe a handful of times in 10 years since I started canyoneering.
Wow.
I gave my ropes to my daughter. I gave my shoes to her. Like, I was like, I don't need them. Like, you'll use them, enjoy. But I'm into canyoneering. So. Yeah.
That's so cool. And that was like, have you had something like that before? Like anything in your life that you like felt that like click for you like that? You just like really enjoyed it?
Well, awesome. Other than like heroin and cocaine, probably not. And so after giving those up in 1999, 98,
Oh, really?
Yeah, I overdosed on October 2nd, 98.
Oh, no way. What? Could you tell me
And
about that?
so after that, this is my addiction. This is
That's
my
wild.
thing.
Yeah, see, I've had, so like, just from my background, I grew up with, I used a variety of drugs in my youth, and I'd overdose, and I overdosed once and got, alcohol poisoning and stuff. And that was like, for me, it was the experience. If anyone were to go climbing and you were to see the hardest route at the crag, and then, they're like, oh, that looks really hard. And then someone in the group were like, I can go up there, I bet. And I'm like, yeah, oh yeah. And then whatever you can imagine is going on in that person's mind. That's why I overdosed. And like, it was like I was trying to prove myself to these like 20 something year olds when I was 11. And,
wow.
And it was, yeah, they were like, but they weren't ushering me on or anything. They looked at me like, you look at me. And they're like, what? And that was not a good idea. And I'm like, whoa. But I found, as I got out the other side of that, and I was like, well, this is kind of odd. You get to like, you have a lot of fun. And then the next day, really thinking about like alcohol, but like the next day, you're hungover and you don't feel good. I don't want to do that. Like, I want to figure out something a little more sustainable and more exciting,
Right.
And so I like spent all this time searching for that and really understanding, like, to me, what like habitual use is, addiction, and how I like develop vices, and and whether or not, even if I get rid of drugs, how other vices would crop up, and how I had to learn to like develop a relationship with myself and my impulses. But then I have my family members, my brother and my sister. I mean, they're doing a lot better now, but they're in their like almost 30s or almost 30s, and they've struggled with drug addiction throughout their lives, and I overdosed, but I wasn't obsessed with using anything. Like when I was a kid, the only thing I'd use a lot of pot, and I'd smoke a lot of cigarettes and drink a lot of coffee, because like logically I could be like, hey, I could use all these things, these aren't going to kill me in the moment, but like these will feel good, so what I was like is like, I don't know if my wiring's a little different than my siblings, because I'd have a lot of grief over that, because it didn't take a lot to like not get addicted to the hard stuff, but like develop bad habits with the moderate stuff. That I just had a lot easier time doing a cost benefit analysis, because what I look at is, when I go into climbing, is that you have risk reward all the time. And when you go into canyoneering and running as well, and I'm always doing a risk reward analysis to like, is the thing that I want worth the effort and the consequences that could happen from going into the experience? And like, because I got into these experiences, especially one that like risks your life, canyoneering similar too, to where you have to do things to keep yourself safe in these unsafe environments. It caused me a lot of thinking about that, because sometimes you realize that you might act without your best interest in mind, without you even knowing it. You might be doing dumb things that you're committing to a danger that you don't really understand, and putting yourself and everyone else at risk. And like, where at in life do you get the opportunity to examine all of these characteristics about yourself, other than doing something crazy as hell, like, climbing or canyoneering, something that doesn't mean anything, but is like super intense. And so like,
it's definitely a better way to risk your life.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I was like, I would even look at it in terms of like, these things that I like to do, is even when I was all hoity-toity and I'm like, look at what I'm doing, and then my ego got all big, I was like, wait, no, there is some like addictive things that I do here. And it like feels really like I've completely blown off like a year or two of like work, just so I can go and like toil away in a climbing gym and chasing all my things. And and a lot of that's just like a kid at play. And I realize the shortcomings of some of those things, and it's caused me to relate with my siblings a lot better. But yeah, sorry, I was a little rambly.
No, it's all good.
So, did you?
Yeah, I mean, we all get to our own bottom, right? And so it takes whatever it takes. Like for me, my daughter was 10 months old. I
almost died. Her dad was on her way to prison, and what was she going to do if one of us wasn't around, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so lucky for me, I went to a pretty good rehab. One of my experiences at rehab, when we were talking about rock climbing, we got to go to a rock climbing gym. It was my first experience ever rock climbing, and we went to a rock climbing gym, indoor gym in Provo. And so they just gave us our harnesses and hooked us up, and they were like, "Okay, there's the wall, go for it," right?
Yeah.
And they're watching us, and they're analyzing us. And I look at this wall, and there's this one wall that like goes up a little bit, and then it goes like hangs upside, like vertical.
Oh, like a roof. Yeah.
Diagonal, right? Diagonal. And I'm like, I'm going for that one. That looks badass.
Yeah.
So, I start climbing it. And of course I can't do it. I've never fucking climbed anything. And so, then I like try a couple of other routes, and I finally get one that I can do and whatever. And so then they get back to the rehab and they analyze the whole day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, your personality is you just like go for it,
Oh, wow.
hardcore 100%. Like some people are more intimidated and they start at beginner level. But no, I just jump all in. And that's how I feel like it was with canyoneering, I did this, it was a mid-level canyon in Zion, not a super beginner canyon, but it was a full day and got into just some really badass stuff. And I got in with a really good crew that taught me some really good things right away from the beginning.
That community is so important, right?
Mm-hmm, it definitely is. And the skills that you learn. But yeah, I mean, just overcoming like one addiction, and it had been, many years later, but just diving 100% into something else is what you got to do just to live your life and be happy.
Yeah, that's what I wondered was like, with the things that I even saw with my sister, she'd always talk about like, when she went to prison because she beat up this like, or she pretend to want to be a prostitute and to like have, and to hook up with these pimps or whatever, and they're selling meth. And then they came over and she was really just lying to them and she beat them up. And then she stole all their meth, and then she stole their money, and then she called the police on them because she was a rival meth dealer. And I'm just like, oh my God. And all I could think is like, this is fucking crazy. And then like getting to know her, she's like gone through all these recovery things. She's like if you get into a breakup, right? You'd be like, who is she? I'm going to kick her ass. And I'm just like, oh my God. Like we just like all these like trauma, all this thing, we just need to unpack all these, but then I like reframe it. And, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a rock, there's a way to like, these things kind of have a way of softening you up a little bit. At least that's my hope. And I always think like, the characteristics that you are, they might be misplaced, but it seems like these outdoor or really recreation, art and running and climbing and canyoneering have a way of like mapping those things onto different stuff. Because like I get really euphoric, obviously, from running, but from like climbing, I get a different sense of euphoria. And things like it feels very, very visceral and in my body and intense, like drugs in a lot of ways, but different kinds of sensations.
It's a way better high, a way more healthy high for sure. And I mean, you definitely can get that euphoric feeling. Yeah. I agree.
And like the equation's nice too, because the more you do it, then the more people want to spend time with you. Like more people want to spend time with you. You get good at it. People look up to you for information. You exchange like it has all this stuff encoded inside of it just by the nature of it,
Yep.
So
I find a little bit more of my soul every time I'm out there. It's awesome.
So when you first started your first time out canyoneering like that, you just dove headfirst into it and you're completely in love.
Mm-hmm.
What happened after that first canyoneering trip? Did you just take off and start doing a bunch of other ones?
Yeah, I started just researching what other canyons were around and what else we could do in the area, and started planning trips with my friends. And we had this core group of, I'm going to say like 5 guys that I went with at first, and then it kind of grew to maybe like 10. We had this Z crew, we called it. But we would just do all these canyons in the Zion area. And I remember my first time, we were like, we want to do a canyon that we don't need permits for. And at that time, you didn't need permits for Inglestead. And so it was like between Birch Hollow and Inglestead. And I don't know if you know these canyons in the Zion area, but the difference basically is Birch Hollow has 120-foot rappel is the longest rappel, and there's I think 10 to 12 rappels in that one. And then Inglestead has a 300-foot rappel just to get into the canyon.
What?
And then after that, all of the rappels are like 120 feet.
Wow.
And so me always going, full force balls to the wall. I choose the 300-foot rappel,
Wow.
Let's do Inglestead. And so my longest rappel before that was 180 feet. And so I get up to that 300-foot drop and it looks intense. I'm just like, oh my God, like who chose this, right?
When you're on that edge, what kind of feelings do you feel?
I mean, there's so many butterflies in your stomach and you're just so nervous.
Wow.
But also, I mean, when you get on rope, it's like there's so much force below you on 300 feet that you almost have to it's like a fireman belay is like pulling down on you.
Whoa.
And you kind of have to push the rope through your belay device, your rappel device.
Feed it through.
Like, I kind of assumed I'm going to hook up and just free fall down and just be done, and just haul ass down this. But that wasn't really the case. And so you kind of had to feed it through for the first maybe 80 feet. But then you start going pretty smoothly. But then when you get toward the bottom of that 300 feet, you're going really fast.
Whoa.
And so luckily not luckily, my crew is smart and had done their research and knew what they were getting into. And so I had a friend down below me that was able to slow me down, and I was able to, if I needed to. And then I could also add friction to my rappel device as I was going down. So it was able to slow me down. And having one of those types of rappel devices on a rappel that long is very, very important so that you don't lose control of your rappel and your hands get too hot and you go too fast.
Especially because it's an interesting thing. The longer you're on it to a point, then it starts getting faster and becomes more important to have more control.
Yeah, for sure.
If you could give paint a picture for people who not experienced something like that, you're basically hanging by a rope. You feel 100% committed, right? And if whatever, the butterflies that you have in your stomach, or any kind of feeling that you have, the only way that you can cope with that is by using the skills and tactics that you've learned, right? To add friction or whatever it is. And then you have to rely on your partner below doing the thing that, because they helped you, to actually really be helpful. And this is maybe one of the times in your life where at work, it's nice when someone's helpful, but here.
No, in canyoneering, your team is definitely essential. Your life can depend on them at certain times in the canyon. And if you don't have a solid crew that knows what they're doing at all times, it can be detrimental. I mean, there are beginner canyons where it may or may not matter. And then there's more intermediate canyons where you definitely have to have a solid crew.
How does that affect your relationship to those people and people in general?
You can do a canyon in one day with a complete stranger. And when you leave the day, you have a best friend.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it just totally changes. You totally bond. You put your life in the hands of someone that you don't know. And just the experience that you had that day, plus as you're hiking, you're just chatting and learning about them. And you just get, I don't know, it's not really vulnerable, but you just open up, And by the end of the day, you've got a really strong bond. It's pretty cool.
Have you ever had that prior to getting into canyoneering and stuff, those kinds of ways to build those relationships?
Motocross was a little that way, but there was a lot of male ego in that.
Yeah.
In canyoneering, I do canyoneer with a lot of guys, and there is still a lot of male ego, but I do canyoneer with a lot of women too. And I mean, there's not so much, I guess, redneckishness
Mm-hmm.
Everyone just kind of comes together and this love of the outdoors, and it's different. It's good. I love the canyoneering community.
That's cool. And with is there an opportunity for, how would I say that, boldness or like bravado in a canyoneering experience? Because what I'm thinking is what you said about the male ego, is that sometimes you have in a climbing scenario, right, where like you have a rope gun or you have routes that are like, you know, bold, where a fall could be like likely to injure you or worse, or a variety of things like that, and you can see how it plays out in the group dynamics. Is there an opportunity to do like you, because no one leads anything or like takes protection forward in a canyon experience, and if you're going to commit to something, the whole group has to commit to it, right, to be able to exit the canyon,
Right.
and so how does that, like, that ego stuff play out in the canyoneering kind of experience? Or what does it look like to be bold in a canyoneering experience?
I think then you're doing more kind of intermediate stuff, or you're like exploring and actually out doing more first ascent kind of things, or doing things in like more harsh conditions. Like sometimes here when the snow is melting, you do get like Class C canyons where you normally just have a Class B canyon, which is like water would be flowing where normally you don't have water flowing, things like that. And so I think more bold people would maybe take those kind of extremes. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that is kind of what I'm asking.
Yeah. And then there's also some canyons that are like RNX rated, which means that there's certain risk factors in those. And that's usually written in the beta or the information that you can find out about the canyons. And so, you know, going in that there's like this exponential risk.
With those kinds of canyons that are rated for their risk factor, is it like, do you find in canyoneering with people that you've met, or even just yourself, that the natural progression is to assume or to play a little bit more with that risk factor? Or are those just like a type of challenging canyon that someone who likes to play with boldness or whatever would seek out? Because in climbing, right, you could do like a 512 and it could be a 512 that's really safe. Or you can go and do like a 512 and the protection that's really run out and all that other stuff. And that calls like a different kind of personality type maybe, or whatever.
I do think it takes a different personality type to do the RNX canyons. I also think that as a general progression as a human, like you start at the easy stuff and you want to see what the harder stuff is. You want to push yourself. So you want to get exploring potholes and you want to get those different challenges, and getting into like natural anchor setting and using sand trap anchors where you're using just like a bag of sand or like a fiddle stick where it's just like a pull on the rope that you pull out, and, you know, just challenging yourself in those kind of ways.
Like
I think
Scott's,
naturally
like,
is a progression.
rock pile anchors.
Yes.
Those are cool.
Yes. Well, Scott's different because, I mean, Deadman anchors, the rock pile anchors are normal, but he's fiddle sticking off of those, which is different and new and exciting. I kind of like that.
What's exciting about it?
You don't have to leave trash in the canyon. A lot of times you get anchors where somebody doesn't like the webbing on that anchor, so they'll add their own webbing to it, and then that next person doesn't feel comfortable with that. So instead of taking those two off, they add their other one, and you get like a rainbow of webbing and clutters up the canyon. And you get a lot of times rope grooves happen when there's bolts in canyons, and so you go and it'll start looking like a comb kind of, because there's all these grooves in the rock, especially here in the soft desert sandstone. I don't think it happens so much in like California, Washington, and Colorado.
Things seem to get more polished than they do get grooved, I think.
Yeah.
And I've seen that, like the whole rainbow of tat here in the Alpine, but I imagine it's a lot different in that kind of environment too, because things don't hide very well there, in the sense that everything's all bushy and scrubby and you're like, whoa, there's some tat, it's been under the tree or whatever. But there it's like everything's out and exposed, and like it's so clean there in terms of like the smoothness of the rock and all the like a log would be, out of place in a highlight, whereas here a log would be the noise. So that creates a challenge in and of itself then if you're using like these natural anchors and stuff like that, because that's like a because when you have like tat, or at least like in a climbing scenario when you have chains, right, everything's just there. It's just like plug and play in a lot of ways. But from my understanding, or not my understanding, I have very little understanding about like the Deadman anchors. Thank you. But I heard something about like rock farming, and then I went on a whole rabbit hole, like people collecting rocks as they go to be able to create Deadman anchors in places that won't have rocks. And I was like, so is that really a thing where you like rock farm and you try to?
Yeah, so I was in a canyon in Capitol Reef actually. And it was, so I did this canyon called Arch Nemesis, and I was one of the first like 50 people that got to do it because they knew a ranger that had found it. So now it's pretty popular and a lot of people do it, but back then it hadn't been done for a while. And so we got to one of the middle rappels. I want to say number 3 or 4. And so after you pull your rope in a canyon, you're committed. You can't turn around and go back out. You have to keep going down. Sometimes there will be an escape route in the middle, but not usually. And that was the case here. And so we get to that rappel, and Josh had told me that it might be the case that we would have to rebuild this anchor because nobody had done the canyon yet that year. And so me and a couple other friends went down, and we left part of our group up on top of the other one because we knew there might not be rocks down there. And so, yeah, sure enough, we had to rebuild the anchor, and we didn't have any rocks. And they threw one rock down, and the first rock they threw down was a pretty big rock, but it was a really soft sandstone. And so when it landed, it just totally like went into gravel. Like,
oh my gosh.
So many pieces. And so I had to like, hey, can you find like harder rocks that are not sandstone, and describe like the types of rocks for them to throw down. And then we had this one guy with us, my friend Frank, and he's kind of a bigger dude, and he's newer to canyoneering. He's more into like rock mountain bike riding and stuff like that. But his wife really loves canyoneering, and so he was going to go down on this anchor that he just watched us build, right? And he was so nervous. And so he had me and his wife stand on the rocks with the, as a backup, even though 2 other people had gone down before him, just to make sure that it wouldn't move. But yeah, that's definitely a true thing. Yeah, Deadman anchors, they're fun.
See but that's an incredible experience to watch your husband like, you know what I mean, be like really overwhelmed in that way.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's such a loving moment too, because I think, you know, like that you do feel really vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like, and it's funny because the bigger you are, the more vulnerable you might feel in that way, I suppose, huh?
Right. Yeah. And so we had him on a backup, and we stood on the anchor, and it didn't move. It was a bummer. But yeah, it's pretty, sometimes you're like, what am I doing here? Like, what is it? Because questioning your life decisions, and then you're like, well, I'm not in LA traffic right now, so that's cool.
This is nice. Because visually speaking, like if you just go off of the intuitive visuals that you see, oftentimes you might freak out, right?
Yeah.
Because
for sure.
Like even in climbing, like, you know, you hang off of like Dyneema, and Dyneema's very, very thin kind of material, but like, you know, we always say it's like, oh, it's dental floss, you know. And in reality, like your mind's just like throwing out delusional fears, you know, the whole time, and you just gotta like just be okay. Yeah.
Just be okay with being okay with it. Embracing the suck, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it works. It's definitely it can be unsafe if you get complacent, but it's definitely, you know, an adventure.
Yeah.
Which is, that's, I mean, kind of why I started the podcast, is to get stories of misadventure out there.
Mhm.
So when people are doing adventures, they're thinking more clearly
Yeah.
and they're risking more wisely.
That's what you find is it seems to be really important. That's why I really love your podcast. And I also like reading about, like, you know, accident reports, as macabre, masochistic as it might seem, but you realize that, like, you really don't know what can actually, you know, go wrong, right? And whatever your fears are, those really aren't always to be trusted, because, like, it's weird, like, you know, the initial fear that you have is not always rational, like the intuitive fear, but also if you have complacency, like, you know, you're calm about stuff, that's not always rational either. So you're kind of like oscillating between testing your fears and testing your assumptions in order to keep you safe, right?
And I feel like, you know, facing your fear and going with it, like feeling that fear, I think is good, because that keeps you on your toes and that keeps you focused to what you're doing. Like, you're going to check your anchor. You're going to check to make sure you're hooked in right. You're going to check to make sure your friends are hooked in right, because you don't want them to fall. You know, that fear, I think, is good. It helps keep you focused. I think if I stop being scared when I get up to rappel, or like feeling anxiety a little bit, I think that's probably when I'll have to stop, because that means I'm complacent, and that's probably when I'll make mistakes.
Were you surprised to find that fear would be your would be something that would be a part of your life throughout canyoneering? Because some people would look at somebody who do intense activities that require risk mitigation as somebody who does not have a high fear response. But I wouldn't, just like what you said, like you said it really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I've talked to people about it a lot, you know, and they're like, you're so badass, you're not scared at all. And I'm like, no, like, I may just manage it well. But, you know, I do have that initial, you know, I am scared. I do have that, like, oh my God, I could fall at any moment.
So you've never gotten like ego pangs before you've created this like principle or this like understanding and value of fear that you were afraid? Because in climbing, I've had that, and like for me though, I've resolved it and I've invited it. It's actually like a friend, right? The fear. And you know, sometimes it's uninvited, but I learn to sit with it. But most of the time, I want it to be there because it protects me more often than not.
Yeah, I feel like it's a good thing.
Yeah,
I was actually at this place called Horseshoe Bend. And I was going to go take a picture of my feet over the river. It's like this Colorado River, beautiful spot, but it's like a maybe 2,000 foot drop down to the river. And so I'm going to put my feet over, and I'm like crab crawling to put my feet over so I can take a picture. And I have a friend with me who's not really a hiker, which is why we're on this hike. And she's like, what are you doing? Like, you do 300-foot rappels all the time. And I'm like, I'm not hooked up to any ropes right now. Like, I'm scared. If I'm this close to an edge, I'm going to be cautious. And she was happy to see that, because she just thought, like, you know, I'm out there, you know, totally full of all of this stuff. And so for her to see that was pretty cool. But.
That is.
Yeah.
And you never get any like negative, do you ever get any negative self-talk though revolving the fear, or are you pretty have a pretty good relationship with that part of yourself?
More, my anxiety comes when it's like weather induced or like other things. I was in a flash flood one time that we talked about it in one of my episodes. We had clients with us and stuff, and that was on a chance. It was supposed to be 20% chance of light rain that day. And so I've really been known to either change plans completely or cancel them because of rain. A lot more so than, also I think I learned from other people's tragedies. And so unfortunately I've had some friends die and get hurt really bad in canyoneering. And so I'm always just like the safety Nazi out there. Yeah.
So you respect that side of yourself. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I see people doing stupid shit, I just don't go with them anymore. Like, I can't. I don't want to be there on that trip, you know?
And then when you were with people in a canyoneering setting, What are some common things that people feel very exposed or they do feel afraid in? Because there's rappelling, but is there like any specific kinds of obstacles that are usually pretty intense that way?
Yeah. I mean, depending on the canyon, you've got some exposed hiking just to get there or to get out of the canyon. So sometimes that can be really challenging. Sometimes you've got, class 4, class 5 climbing to get out or into a canyon. And then sometimes you've got really cold potholes full of water, or sometimes the potholes can be empty and you have to climb out of them. And so having that kind of knowledge is really important. Sometimes if you're in certain areas where the water's flowing, you'll have to have knowledge of like hydraulics and things like that, like in Ouray, and I think Washington has a lot of those.
Yeah, Washington. I've like fervently been looking online, like Rope Wiki and stuff. Like, where's some Class B canyons? Like, I'm like, come on, give me some dry canyons. But no, they're all wet.
Yeah.
But they're beautiful though.
Yeah, Costa Rica has some really pretty Class D canyons with warmer water. So that was nice.
Oh, that would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like a lazy river,
So
but
beautiful.
very intense.
I mean, we still had like 3 mil wetsuits, but we weren't shivering the whole day.
Washington's a little more hardy, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, you definitely need to know what type of canyon you're getting into and the challenges that are involved before you get there.
If we just hit the rewind button really hard, what's canyoneering?
So, canyoneering is a mix of hiking, climbing, rappelling, swimming, scrambling, I don't know, going through a drainage down a canyon.
That's wild. And where you're at, or in like the Colorado Plateau, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that are dry canyons.
Most of the time.
And
we do get a lot of the Zion canyons will have the potholes full of water, like Imlay and Heaps will usually have water in them. They won't be flowing, but they will have water obstacles in them. And
that's very unique to the environment that you're at, right? Like the type of canyons that you find, or is that because of all like the soft rock, the sandstone and stuff like that in relation to the Rockies?
Yeah. Just the way the water is just carved through the Navajo sandstone and just carve these spectacular crevices or arteries, I guess.
And they and it's a lot of it's like what I think you mentioned this, but it's like hiking with with obstacles.
Yes, hiking with obstacles. So not only do you need ropes to get down certain drops, like you'll come to a cliff or whatever and have to rappel, but sometimes you have rocks that you have to climb over. Sometimes you have down climbs where you're just climbing down certain things, and then sometimes you're just hiking flat. Sometimes you're in rivers, sometimes you're on ridges.
Wow.
Usually you're in drainages.
It seems like even more varied terrain than rock climbing in a lot of ways.
I think so. That's what more intrigued me about canyoneering than climbing.
It's very adventurous, and like I like how it. For me, I liked hiking, and then I found that I liked running a little more, but only trail running, because running by itself sucked. I just found out it was so confusing. Like even when I get into all these things, because when I've gotten to like running, I'm like, oh, I've always hated running. Why would I like this? And I realized that, oh no, you could like move fast enough so you don't have to backpack, but you just like hike all day. And there's like all these little like nuances in there. And that's where my favorite thing about hiking is when there's obstacles. So I can be slow and I can think a lot. And that's where canyoneering just really hit it for me, because it just seems like, you're trying to get from point A to point B. And along the way, you have a variety of obstacles that the landscape provides you.
Mhm.
and then you have to rely on your technical ability with rope to descend the vertical stuff with the assistance of friends, and
Mhm.
then your body to get through like all the other kinds of obstacles.
Yeah.
That's just and it's like what you said is like all the physical part where you're using your body is
Mhm.
in like correct me if I'm wrong, shorter spurts throughout the whole thing. Because if I climbing, I'm doing like this whole vertical thing and I'm really intense in this little like vertical column. But with you it's like move a little bit, do some like challenging physical problem, move, challenging physical problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you might be stemming for 20 feet, 30 feet, depending on the canyon. Some canyons like 4 hours, whatever.
Oh.
And then you're, just hiking flat, and then you might swim for a little bit, and then you have a rappel, and whatever.
Oh.
Yeah, it changes a lot, and depending on the canyon and the terrain you're in, it all changes too. So and the season.
In the area that you're at, and like with the kinds of canyons, I know there's a lot, but that are available, what are like some kinds of styles, like not wet or dry, but like what kinds of like obstacles or styles of movement do you find in these kinds of canyons? Like I know there's stemming, but is there other kinds of things?
Yeah, the potholes, like I've said, where sometimes they can be either full of water and you're just swimming across them, and then you can get out easy, or if they're like at a certain level and you can't reach the bottom to be able to get out, or if they're like no water in them at all, and then you have to like either use hooks or other certain types of technical devices and ascenders to be able to get out.
Wow.
So those can change, and then just scrambling over rocks, stemming, rappelling.
And through the scrambling and stemming, do you assume a certain level of risk within those? I imagine the scrambling isn't like prolonged over a vertical period, but
it can depend on the canyon. There's one like Santhrax has a pretty hard climb in the middle of it, the crux of it, which is what makes it an X canyon. And then there are some canyons like in North Wash area where you're stemming high for a long period of time. And so those also make that a little more challenging, because if you slip, you're falling like 30 feet in a really narrow slot.
Oh, wow.
And those can be more scary. And then also like shenanigans, the very end section, like the lower section is really, really narrow. So if you're a certain like width, like
oh yeah,
my helmet couldn't fit through one way. My butt actually got stuck, and I had to have friends like lift me up and like maneuver me over like 20 feet. But we had friends with us on that hike that were, at the higher weight section. And so they were stemming above us. And he said that presented a totally different challenge than being low, because, if he did fall, he's not going to make it to the bottom of the canyon. He's just going to be stuck in there somewhere. And then, search and rescue is going to have to come, or we're going to have to like try to hoist him out somehow. And so that can be definitely a challenge and more dangerous. So you definitely want to know, especially with those skinny canyons, what you're getting into and what your body's capable of, because they are physically demanding and you get tired really easy.
Yeah,
if you don't have the strength to stem like that for 4 hours, don't get in there.
Yeah.
For sure.
One of those things where if you commit to, there's a certain point to where there's like no point of return on committing, right?
Yeah. You can't return. You're just going to have to like rest and get your energy until you can. And then there's also some, where it requires certain pothole decisions. And if you don't know how to get out of those potholes, you're going to be stuck.
Well, like what kind of pothole decisions, if you could?
So some of them, like there's neon. If the pothole is at a certain level, like if it's full of water, like when I went through, it's super easy. So you just like swim across and you can get out. But if it's at a medium level, if it's empty, you can do like a partner boost. So you can stand on somebody's shoulder and get out, and then you can lower rope and everyone else can ascend.
Oh, cool.
But if it's kind of a mid-level, you can't do that. And so you have to figure out a way where you have to like do a floating like mount out of the thing but you can't really like reach the lip from the level.
Whoa.
So in those kind of certain circumstances, you can actually like your backpacks float.
Mhm.
And so you can stand on 2 backpacks, and that can kind of get you high enough to be able to like beach well out of the pothole.
That's
So
crazy.
there's certain techniques, and there's classes that you can take from certain some people
Mhm.
in the area, some of the outfitters, so that you have the skills before you get there by yourself.
How far out do you think you are at that point in terms of hours when you're at that pothole in the Neon Canyon?
Oh, like, I mean, you're at least 6 hours into the day.
Whoa.
Usually people do Neon as a backpack trip, and they'll combine it with a couple others, because the hike into there is at least 3-ish hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but once you get there, you're like at the Escalante River, and there's a couple other canyons you can do. So people will normally combine it. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely a point to consider, because it makes search and rescue like a lot more difficult when you're that far out there.
Yeah. And
If
that's where,
something happens.
and that's where it's like, these are some of the very rare things that we have in our life, where when you commit to them, you really do, you commit to them. And
Yeah.
the consequences are very real.
Yep.
And even with the search and rescue, like, I'm often, well, I'm not surprised, but they do their best too, but it's like a long time to get help with search and rescue. Even
they can't get there in an hour or two. Sometimes it takes several hours, and sometimes if you have internal bleeding, you don't have that long.
Mm-hmm.
Which is sad, but it's realistic.
Do you have is there a lot of different, or would you often have yourself in scenarios where you're using like the assistance of a partner in order to get through obstacles? Like you said, the partner lifts. I saw some things where people like will lower people down little sections. Is that something you rarely do, or do you find yourself doing that quite often?
I mean, it depends on the canyon for sure, but it happens often.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Then
yeah. And there's a lot of times too where like I'll usually be like, it's called the meat anchor, and and it'll usually be like on shorter rappels or whatever, but it'll be something like I can down climb, but the other people don't feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll just hook the harness to me in a way, and then I like put myself in an area where like I'm not going to get pulled off of the cliff.
Yeah.
And then they just basically rappel off of me, and then I down climb down after.
I've scared some people inadvertently on accident, but I was completely safe. I was rappelling, or I was belaying them right from the top, and I just like led a pitch in the alpine, and it was just super easy climbing, low 5th class. And there's a notch in between these huge boulders that are as tall as me, and I just climb up and over the boulders, and then I sit, and the rope's running straight through the notch, and I just do a hip belay.
Yeah.
And I'm hip belaying them up, and we're in the alpine ATCs, all these things, and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm not connected to anything, and I'm like, "Listen, if you were to, I can't get sucked through the notch in the rock. You're completely fine." Like, and that's where I go back to like, you learn that there's especially as like the guy that you work with, right, as an engineer, and if you understand like physics, right, this is so empowering for me, from like a kid who hated science and didn't give a shit about physics, and now it's like physics are probably one of the most important things that I could learn, because if you understand at least like physics, like there's you can understand objective reality, and you can like mitigate risk objectively.
Yep.
Which is really gratifying.
With the sand trap too, I mean, that's basically a tarp full of sand that you're rappelling off of, but the way that you put it, like, it's physics and it doesn't move.
Mm-hmm.
And you usually have a backup person when the first person goes. So if it does move, you put more sand in it, and then the next person goes, and if it moves, you put more sand in it. But usually that doesn't happen because of the way that you angle it and where you put them, and then you're able to just pull everything down with you. The tarp empties all of its sand, and there's nothing left in the canyon. It's really cool.
And I just think that, see, like, like 100%, the nerdiest like dad me comes out, where it's like, okay, science was boring for me in school for whatever reason, but you like get me really scared and nervous, and you're like, this is gonna work, and I'm like, no, it's not. That does not look like it's gonna work. And the only thing that's gonna get you through it is experiencing it, and then learning that there's objective reality and there's a way to discern what is true and what's not. And this is the practice, because you're not gonna die. Like,
Yeah.
but
And again, we go out and practice this stuff and, you know, do it a few times before we like go out in the field and, you know, or take classes to learn how to do it. But I've watched people like go down on the sand trap and then pull it afterwards. And it's just really cool to see like from the top, all of the sand deploy and like everything go flawlessly.
I've never
really
seen
neat.
that before. I'm gonna have to check out a video of that now.
Yeah. I wonder if we put one online.
Oh,
We'll have to. I'm going to have a practice day soon. So we'll do one.
what percentage of your I guess of your free time, right, that you spend canyoning and all these other things, what percentage of that time is spent like practicing skills and different tactics like rope work and stuff?
So I started this thing with my friends. We call it Skills Day or Not Night. And it was definitely in the winter times in Kanab. You know, you get like socially weird and the days are short and you just want to, you know, hang out with your friends and stuff. And you're not out canyoneering because it's too cold and stuff. And so we would have people over once a month, usually in the wintertime, just to practice knots and just keep fresh on skills. And then I try to do at least 3 times a year, I try to do a skills day where we go out and to a cliff and actually practice those kinds of things. And like one day we might do the sand traps, one day we might do potholes, one day we always practice like ascending and passing knots. And I always just let all my friends know, like, hey, we're doing it this day. And it's usually a pretty good thing. We have a potluck after. We didn't do it in 2020. Actually, we had one in 2020 right before COVID closed everything down. But I'm thinking about having another one here coming up soon because I think we really need it.
Yeah,
it's pretty fun.
Is it like one of your favorite ways to socialize too?
Yeah.
And that,
yeah, for sure.
Do you spend, this might be a personal question and it's okay if you don't want to talk about it, but like how much of your time do you spend socializing? Do you spend canyoneering as your form of socializing?
I try to spend most of my socializing time canyoneering. Yeah. I do spend a lot of time canyoneering.
I like that.
Yeah, I'm either like canyoneering, sometimes hiking, or with my grandkids. So
that's as like, you know, growing up and stuff like that. I'd kick the dirt and like work, come home tired, like that's like, you know, weekend comes, you relax, get ready, do it all over again, and like hanging out with friends. I was always like I don't like, not to like in a downer way, and I appreciate this now because I spend so much of my time doing, and it's nice to not and to spend time relaxing with friends. But like when you don't have this like passion or this thing that everything seems to revolve around, I just didn't, it's hard for me to spend time with people like that. Like not people like that, but people in that way where we're either like climbing or going for a run or, you know, adventuring, hiking, and that's become my life to the point to where like, if it were my way, if my family were we're doing some of the stuff, we might be doing like, you know, some climbing and like, skiing on Christmas, right? Climbing for 4th of July, which I've been trying to rope them into that. And it's like, I check with my girlfriend a lot. I'm like, you know, our dates are always rock climbing and running and hiking. You're all right with that, right? And it's because I've never had relationships that were not just an intimate relationship, but a relationship with friends and family that revolved around mutual interests. And that's been a very different point in my life in the last like 5 years, to where if I'm going to go hang out with a buddy who's like really into martial arts, like we hang out consistently to improve our martial arts, but like I really connect with that person when I'm doing that. And it's like,
right,
you know, and when you want to like party really hard, because I think about this when I was a kid, and I remember adults used to party like really hard sometimes, and that wasn't like always the most comfortable thing as a kid. And as an adult, I think about that a lot because like my late nights are like alpine starts to go climbing and like all of these things. Same thing, you know, sometimes I'm late, which I feel bad and I try to not do that because I'm same thing too as maybe a dad who stays out a little too long. And I'm like trying to reconcile all those things. But I just love having these opportunities to connect with people like that and in that way, you know, and in a positive way that like helps me and hopefully might make me a better father and a better person and all that other stuff. A little more.
I mean, I think that he'll see what you're doing and, you know, he'll see you're not at the bars, you're not hanging out, you're doing things, and you invite him along with you and he'll get into it. Like, it took my daughter years, but she loves the outdoors now.
Yeah. It's like my son, it becomes a mixed relationship with it, but it's often that the type 2 fun with him. Because I've even had where I take him out. He's like, I don't want to go. I want to stay home. And I'm like, oh, I feel a little bad about this. And then afterwards, he's like telling his teachers, like, oh yeah, we got to go in the, you know, the lava tubes and see all the lava flows and all these other things. And like, I've even caught, like, he was drawing one day and I'm like, what are you drawing on your water bottle? He's like, oh, I'm drawing mountains on it. And I'm like, why are you doing that? He's like, oh, don't you know? And I'm like, what? They're my favorite. And he even like came home one day and he's like had to write what courage was. And he drew Mount St. Helens. And then it's him and his dad. And it's like, courage is me getting to the top with my dad or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's really cool, man.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And those are going to be things like I look back at memories with my dad growing up, you know, and they're my favorite. Like, I love that he exposed me to the outdoors so young. So,
that's so cool.
You can't go wrong with that. I don't think you're doing good.
Well, thanks for the reassurance. I really do appreciate that. It's hard sometimes when you're looking from the other, you know, not in hindsight, but as they grow older, you know, it's a little easier.
Yeah, it gets hard when they're teenagers, but then they have grandkids and that's the best, I'm telling you. And you might not be able to picture right now, but they're so awesome.
I watch how my son and my mom interact and I'm just so like, oh, I can't wait. I can't.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, because like, especially with me, because I do crazy, like I'll take them climbing and stuff. I'll get their dad scared.
Yeah, that's me. Like, I can't wait to get my grandkids out there.
Where can people learn more about you?
So mostly on Facebook. It's Shirls Rocks Jocelyn on Facebook, or the Canyons Are Calling podcast.
And where can they check out your podcast?
Pretty much anywhere the podcasts can be played, I think. If I'm not on there, they can email me at thecanyonsarecalling@gmail.com and let me know so that I can get on to there. Because I'm still pretty new at it and I'm not sure that I'm everywhere.
And yeah, I'm really enjoying this podcast and it is so cool.
Yeah, I've got some exciting episodes coming up. So
yeah, I can't wait for Scott Sweeney. That's gonna be
great.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I might finish it tomorrow. So.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. Well, I'll be looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Shirls.
Yeah. You're welcome. Have a great night.
All right. Yeah, you too. Bye.
Later.
Woo! Thank you guys for listening to this episode of the podcast. Shirls is a fascinating woman with an interesting story, especially coming from having like an abusive relationship with drugs and emerging from that and eventually finding herself immersed in this, life of canyoning or canyoneering, solving problems, moving through obstacles out in the wilds of southern and central Utah. And I think it's beautiful. She's really figuring herself out and as a means of play. And I think play is really important. There's a lot of lessons in our own lives that are waiting for us to be discovered. And I think it's, uniquely your own shit to figure out. Right. But playing and putting yourself out there, making yourself vulnerable or challenging yourself, in whatever way is meaningful or inspiring to you is, a reliable way for me to be able to get those like lessons and joy and stretch my highs and lows to really exciting levels. So it's amazing to be able to connect with someone else who found like another activity, another that is a reason to explore these beautiful places and push yourself and relax and enjoy being with other people. The whole combination. If you want to learn more about Sherrills, you can find her on Instagram, The Canyons Are Calling, and on all podcasting platforms. Check out her awesome podcast, The Canyons Are Calling, on Spotify and all podcasting platforms. You could also find links to all of that and to some videos of some of the canyons she mentioned on my website, becominghumanpodcast.com. Or you can find them in the show notes. If you'd like to support my podcast, you can head over to becominghumanpodcast.com, leave a comment. You can rate me or rate the podcast on it's OnlyFans. You can rate the podcast on iTunes. It really helps out. And I'm going to play you out with a song by Aesop Rock and Homeboy Sandman called Ask Anyone. It's a beautiful tribute to MF Doom, and if you guys don't know who MF Doom is, it's worth checking out. He was an excellent hip-hop artist. He passed away recently, but he's got a beautiful body of work. Anyways, without any further ado, here's Aesop Rock and Homeboy Sandman. Enjoy your spring, y'all.
Now is that? Yes, it's Zev Love X sound I'm reckless. I took it to the head and heart. You were back as metal face and threatening my pearl white Acura from the second bar. Barfing up a masterclass in charismatic disrespect and trash talk. Mask on, mac and cheese Timberlands. Sold the first Appleseed CDs at your brownie show while you were saying something of a member like the Alamo. I was yelling every word and never late. And when you finally played, hey, I felt the venue levitate.
Ask anyone.
L out of upstate, come to learn it's only phase one of the floodgates. Doomsday gluing true grit to the baseline and made himself a hero and a villain at the same time. Back in 94 you had that line about the Nikes on the wire. I'd always see these Nikes on the wire when I was driving through a neighborhood somebody said you stayed in. Convinced I'd found the actual inspiration. For the record, I was not even close to the right neighborhood. Even when the heart is pure, the brain is mush. Thank you for the stories and a fuck you to the normies. Berwin said we lost our Jordan. I would sprinkle in some Voorhees in a great breeze. I have this memory of me and you rapping meat grinder to each other at a BBQ and BK. Got the same memory with a couple other people too. Trading doom lines, that's what people do. You were always kind of me in person. I tried to play it cool, but I was always kind of nervous. 30 summers of guiding the muddy waters to the men with many names. I hope you're somewhere with your brother, yeah.
Super villaino, Illino, chopping records that my parents listened to. Doom was on a mission to remind you that the magic is what matters. But where'd he find that banner? Where'd he find them patterns? He ain't had no manners. My favorite villain is the drop on Victor Vaughn, but every time I hit a great day intro, I'ma sing along and catch me sleeping on the GMOs. Them lessons on point. We share a brother in Curie from the question mark joint. Super villain in the function and his peoples never fall. Thanks for introducing us to John Robinson and Starr and the era full of rarefied jewels and making use of airtime for making bad headlines cool. Yo, being crazy takes guts. Monster Island's ours had a rep for being nuts. Extra special words and a special herb still lingers. My pantheon is Bird and Mingus, Prince and Metal Fingers. Larger than life, he had his own Nikes. I'm a clear weather brand dude, but dag dome. Food was the anagram. Fresh put me on, I proceed to put on anyone that was fam-a-lamb. And every particle, genuine article. Okay, you stiffed a few promoters who thought they booked a man under the mask, but they could never tell for certain. Walking the walk while talking in third person. He wore a mask so the charge won't grab. On a rooftop with a large stone slab. Seen where the industry was going and had to go nads to go nab. Thanks. A bar is not a measure. A music doomers doing it's a unit of buried treasure. No one ever done it better, so I'ma keep my computer on caps lock forever. Long live.
Okay, well, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Becoming Human podcast on the Canyons Are Calling podcast. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Will and I. So if you like this show, please like it, share it with your friends. I feel like canyoneering is always better done with a team. If you could write a review on Apple Podcasts, that helps me get found by people in that community, so that would be really awesome. The more reviews and ratings that I get, the more encouragement I get to just do more content. So it's pretty exciting, keeps me going. Even just stars, you know. Anywho, let me know if you like this show. You can email me at thecanyonsarecalling@gmail.com. You can join us on our Facebook group page, The Canyons Are Calling. I'm also on Instagram, although I don't really post there very often, but it's Canyons Are Calling on Instagram. I'll have links to all of those in the show notes. If you're enjoying this awesome still drums in the background, that's Z the Handpan Man. You can find him on Spotify. I've got a link to him in the show notes. Actually, I have his website, zthehandpanman.com. And then our other intro music is by Tig Booth. There's a link to him as well. If you want to learn more about canyoneering gear, or read about Tom's latest raves, you can find that on canyoneeringusa.com. There's a link to that in the show notes too. Shout out to me at work. Anyway, Canyons Are Calling now. Gotta go.